My name is Mart Zukas, and I'm Director of Product Marketing at Intel 471. Welcome to this talk titled Ransomware Dramas, Why Focusing on Ransomware Itself is Not Enough, where we will take a closer look at the various moving pieces that make up a ransomware attack and explore what to focus on besides the ransomware to mitigate this threat. We'll also take a closer look at the goings-on behind the scenes for some of the actors involved in this space and the challenges they themselves face. Challenges which provide excellent opportunities to gather intelligence and increase our understanding of this threat. You may have heard of the recent dramas around the Conti ransomware as a service, where someone leaked a large data set of internal communications of the group, exposing all manner of internal goings-on, warts and all. This is actually not the first time there's been a falling out amongst the participants of a ransomware group. So in this session, we want to explore some prior examples that shed a light on the murky world of big game ransomware hunting. In this session, we will look at what the cyber underground is actually like and why that matters, why ransomware attacks are so popular, besides the obvious reason, and who the main actors in a typical ransomware attack are. Then we'll look at some examples of things not going entirely to plan for ransomware actors. We'll start off with a well-known example, last year's attack on Colonial Pipeline, which turned into much more than the DarkSide group ever bargained for. At about the same time, however, the Babook ransomware as a service also disappeared, and we'll look at the circumstances behind its demise as well. And finally, we'll look at some of the big and small dramas around the REvil ransomware as a service before it too eventually disappeared. And then we'll finish up with a summary and conclusions. But before we get started, I want to take a couple of minutes to explain who we are at Intel 471 and what we do. So, to set the scene, who are we at Intel 471? What is the cyber underground actually like? And why don't we call it the deep and dark web? And how do ransomware attacks typically work? Well, we are a cyber threat intelligence company collecting intelligence in what we call the cyber underground. The underground ecosystem on the internet where actors buy, sell, plan, and discuss a variety of products, services, and tools which come together to create the threats that our customers are trying to mitigate. We focus on two main areas: adversary intelligence, looking at actor communications on forums, instant messaging services, etc., and malware intelligence, which is focused on the tools those actors are using. We've built a large collection infrastructure that collects both actor communications and detailed technical data across more than 100 different malware families in near real time, from locations all over the world. Our focus is on tracking the top tiers of actors and the tools that they use, as these are the actors and the tools that are responsible for the threats and impacts that our customers are concerned about. Our research team analyzes the data we collect, runs sources, and builds intelligence that we deliver to our customers in different verticals around the globe. For our researchers, we believe in a boots-on-the-ground model. Despite the fact that this is cyber threat intelligence, and so in theory could be done from anywhere in the world, we believe to truly be able to blend into the background and gain access to the most closed-off parts of the underground, our researchers must be located close to the actor ecosystems that they are tracking, so that they are truly able to pass off as a local, because they have all the relevant and recent local cultural knowledge, how well the local football team did, what the weather is like, how the buses are running, etc. We turn this intelligence into a number of products, such as adversary intelligence and malware intelligence, obviously, but also into products which focus very specifically on a number of topics which are important when it comes to mitigating cyber threats, such as monitoring of and recovery of stolen or compromised credentials in credential intelligence, or tracking vulnerabilities through the underground to facilitate patch prioritization in vulnerability intelligence. And the purpose of all of our efforts is to help our customers move to a more proactive approach when it comes to mitigating cyber risk, as demonstrated in this graphic. Instead of focusing solely on your own attack surface, our intelligence products help you to look outside of the perimeter not just at the malware, but at the actors behind the malware, understanding what they are trying to achieve and how you may be able to move out of the path of danger before that threat actually materializes on your perimeter, or even worse, inside it. The arrow at the top is actually very important. We try and track both the actor and the tool and map the actor to the tool and vice versa wherever possible. Although not always possible, in those cases where we are able to, it gives a very complete overview of a particular threat to be able to observe it from both perspectives simultaneously. The environment we play in is the cyber underground. Some people refer to it as the deep and dark web, but we think that term is unhelpful. To explain why, let's take a closer look now at how the cyber underground works. So I will start off with a variant of that old psychological trick of asking you to think of anything but an elephant while showing you a picture of an elephant, meaning you suddenly can't think of anything but elephants. In this case, we've all seen images claiming that the deep and dark web is like an iceberg. Well, it isn't, and please don't think of it as an iceberg, mostly hidden underwater. To help you with that, here is a picture of an iceberg. Also, the whole term deep and dark web is unhelpful. It conjures up images of a nebulous environment, hard to navigate, almost magical, when the actual truth is quite the opposite. The reason for that is very fundamental for our understanding of threats. Most threats we are faced with today are not the work of a single actor or even a single group of actors, but rather the work of different groups working together in some way, where each member benefits from being a small part of a bigger whole. We can think of them as chains, cycles, business processes, economic value chains. The key part is that they are made up of different participants all working together in some way. And a participant can be a member of multiple chains at the same time, much like a business has multiple customers or produces different products and services for different markets. And that is a much better and more accurate way of thinking about the underground than as a dark web. Think of it as a marketplace. It is limited in size, so it's no iceberg, and it's structured. The actors that inhabit it create that structure. They do this because they're always looking for new actors to group or partner with, either as a supplier or as a consumer. And by creating this structure, it makes it easiest for others to find you or for them to know that you're interested in or looking for something in particular. And you know where to go if you want to plan or discuss a particular topic. So like a marketplace, the underground has specific areas focusing on specific subjects. If you're interested in bulletproof hosting, go to this forum. If you want to buy credentials, go to this marketplace, etc., etc. And because it is limited in size and fairly structured, we can actually map out that structure. We can identify and track the top tier actors, the movers and shakers in this environment. And by keeping an eye on who is working with whom, what actors are building and selling, what capabilities their products have, we can gain valuable insights about potential threats even before these threats materialize, because we are tracking what goes into an attack, for instance. And one of the most prevalent threats over the past 2 years or so has been ransomware. There have been lots and lots of ransomware attacks. Here are just a couple of recent examples. We've mentioned Colonial Pipeline, the Kaseya attack. So when we look at this, a couple of questions and assumptions come to the fore. Why is this attack type become so popular? Where did it come from? And surely, with such large ransoms being paid, here is an example of a victim paying a ransom of $40 million. Surely, there must be some very sophisticated actors behind these attacks. Well, as I hope to show you, there is an entire underground ecosystem of actors that are involved in these attacks. And a ransomware attack actually starts well before any ransomware is ever deployed. So although the media seems to focus on the ransomware, as defenders, there are other things worthy of our attention as well. And although there are professional or very sophisticated actors involved, there is no shortage of drama in the underground when it comes to ransomware attacks. So where did these ransomware attacks come from? Well, a complete dive into the origins of these attacks could probably fill several of these sessions all by itself. So here's a very condensed overview of what the underground got up to over the years before we ended up with big game ransomware attacks. It all started around 2008 with banking malware botnets, which started man-in-the-browser attacks against retail bank accounts, mostly in Western Europe. These attacks started netting the attackers large amounts of money and got increasingly complicated. During these years, the underground matured in response to this. New services and business models, malware as a service, for instance, were developed, and new actors were drawn into the ecosystem to offer an increasing range of products, services, and goods. This increase in maturity, especially when it came around to money muling, allowed the more sophisticated attackers to also start targeting wholesale banking in the US, Europe, and Asia, leading to much bigger individual losses and more income for the attackers. Now, over time, banks became much better at detecting and defending against these types of attacks and frauds, so much so that it became less and less profitable for actors to build these types of attacks, as you ended up earning very little for a lot of effort. So in response, actors moved. Some went low, focusing on attacks that netted them less income, but also took much less effort to set up, such as account takeover or credit card fraud, for instance. But some actors went high, deciding to develop much more sophisticated attacks, and this led to the spate of Swift gateway attacks around 2015, such as the Bank of Bangladesh incident and others. And eventually, those actors perfected the big game ransomware attack and abandoned the Swift gateway attack in favor of this new type of attack, which basically appeared in early 2019. So we have a start off with retail banking attacks, banks figuring out how to defend against them, attackers responding, some going high, some going low. And in the end, we ended up with these. This is where the big game ransomware attacks came from. Now, and that kind of brings us to the present day. And nowadays, many actors have decided to focus on some part of that big game ransomware ecosystem. Because interestingly, many of the tools and techniques developed by actors that went low, for instance, info stealing or account takeover, have a role to play in the ransomware attack chain, as we'll see later. But before we get to that, let's look at why are ransomware attacks so popular? Well, why are there so many of them? Well, there are basically three main reasons. One of them extremely obvious, the other two maybe less so. Let's start off with the obvious one. They are very, very profitable. The example I gave earlier of a $40 million ransom kind of proves that. And although, to my knowledge, that is the record for a ransom, multi-million-dollar ransoms themselves are fairly common. The actor Unknown, of whom there'll be more later, boasted that the REvil operators had a turnover of more than $100 million a year. That is based on just their cut of the ransoms being paid, their cut typically being between 20 or 30%. So the total turnover of REvil is much higher. But the Swift gateway attacks I mentioned earlier were also very profitable, in the hundreds of millions for one attack, if done right. However, the big issue with Swift gateway attacks is that they only work for a very specific type of victim, a bank. So you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. That takes time and a lot of effort. Ransomware attacks, on the other hand, fit almost every type of organization. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. So no matter what type of network you have access to, chances are you can run a ransomware attack against it. That also makes this type of attack incredibly attractive. And finally, the effort involved in a ransomware attack can be divided up. That doesn't really add to their popularity, but instead means that once the underground realizes their inherent advantages, it is very easy to scale up the number of attacks because the division of labor is exactly the reason why the underground exists. So let's look at now at how the effort involved in a ransomware attack has typically been divided up and who the main actors are in such a typical ransomware attack. So it all starts off with someone who has access to something, the access broker. The access is passed to an affiliate of a ransomware, usually of a ransomware as a service operation. It is the affiliate that actually does most of the work around the actual lifting around a ransomware attack. And then finally, we have our ransomware as a service operation. And of course, the final actor in this strategy is our victim. So the access broker has access to either botnets, runs info stealing malware, brute forces accounts, exploits vulnerabilities, sends out spam, whatever. They engage in this activity, which yields them access to infrastructures. And once they have these accesses, they sell them on to the affiliate or pass them on to the affiliate, who actually spins that initial access up into a full-blown ransomware attack. So that means they map the network, they move laterally, they exfiltrate data, which is a very important step currently in ransomware attacks, to use as leverage to kind of force victims to pay up, not just by encrypting their data, but also by threatening to publish it. They sabotage or disable backups, and the final step is the deployment of ransomware. Now, ransomware is actually a very specialized piece of software, right? If you've gone into all of this effort to kind of run your attack, you don't want to be thwarted because the ransomware you use is of low quality. It's too slow, it gets detected, it turns out that the victim can decrypt it. So the building of the ransomware software itself is actually specialized activity that has been, that is the kind of preserve of the ransomware as a service operators. They built the ransomware software. That's how it initially started off. They delivered this as a service, but the ransomware itself kind of turned into more of a brand because it's the visible part of this attack. So besides just building this infrastructure, they are also kind of the brand behind the whole operation. And because they are a brand, because they feel that this is a brand, they also take charge in things like running the negotiations, pressuring victims into paying up, and handling the payments. The idea is, if you're, for instance, if you're exfiltrating data, if your ransomware as a service is well known, then when you publish or leak data, the chances that the press pick it up are much greater, which leads to a bigger impact, which in turn makes it more likely that victims pay up. So the three main actors are the access broker, who passes the access to the affiliate. The affiliate actually does most of the legwork around it, moving laterally, kind of preparing the network for encryption and exfiltrating the data. And then the ransomware as a service operators deliver the ransomware and run the negotiations that happen. And if all else, everything goes to plan, then the victim pays the ransom, and a cut or a share of that ransom makes its way down this chain, and everybody gets their share. And again, this is the reason why actors participate in these chains, because they profit from them. So in the next slides, we'll look at these three roles, these three types of actors in a little more detail. First off, let's start with the access brokers. There are a lot of them active in the underground. What they try to do is gain access to many things, and they look for the gold nuggets, right? The access, the access to very interesting networks that have the potential for someone to run a ransomware attack against them. When we analyze and look at them, there are a couple of common techniques that we see recurring time and time again on how these access brokers gain that initial access to organizations. So there's a focus, and I've listed them here on the slide. There's a focus on compromised credentials. There are existing, remember, from actors that went low back in the day, trying to steal Netflix accounts, Spotify accounts, etc. There are existing botnets and infrastructures focused on stealing credentials, usernames and passwords. Now, in amongst these big data sets are very interesting little gold nuggets, namely usernames and credentials that give you access to corporate infrastructure. For instance, remote access services, which is one of the key first ways in for access brokers. So they focus on those, either trying to find the accounts by going through lists of compromised credentials, or by focusing on remote access services themselves, trying to brute force, trying to exploit vulnerabilities, trying to find a way in. Remote access services aren't the only ones. There is a whole focus in and of itself of actors trying to exploit any public-facing application to try and use that as an initial channel in to the rest of the network. And then finally, there are actors that do huge spam runs, which install malware. So they build botnets, and if the bot is inside an interesting organization, then it is that bot which is the initial kind of hopping off point. Once you have malware on a machine, most malware will allow you to download and install additional software. So basically, you're commanding an endpoint. One of the things we see is that because there is such a huge demand for access in the underground to kind of fuel these ransomware attacks, that access brokers have started to focus on supply chain attacks. They're trying to hit organizations not just to get access to that organization, but to get access to its customers. So hosting companies, ISPs, software development companies, etc. These have all become very attractive because potentially, as our managed security service providers, for instance, because what they give you is the capability to gain access to many targets all at once. Now, one thing to note is with all these going through compromised credentials and sending out spam is a lot of this stage is actually not targeted at all. They're just trying to get access to as many things as they can and kind of sort them out and find the interesting accesses in amongst them. So the unfortunate truth is that most victims of a ransomware attack weren't intentionally targeted. It just started off, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time and were caught up in the net of one of these access brokers. So on to the affiliates. Initially, affiliates were overlooked a bit when this first started, and this had to do, in some ways, in the way that the operators worked, who were trying to basically present themselves as affiliates, should be very lucky and count themselves lucky that they could work with a particular ransomware as a service. And because, of course, if you want to run a ransomware attack, you need to have access to the ransomware software itself. So if the operator allows you on, then that is a big deal. So the impression was created that they kind of work for the operators, whereas in actual truth, the relation is much more of one of equals. Because as a lot of operators have now also realized, especially since more ransomware as a service operations pop up, that having good affiliates and good affiliate teams is actually a very critical factor for a successful ransomware operation. And so operators are now actively courting the top affiliate teams. So it's like star football players, for instance, where teams are actually trying to, they are even poaching them from each other. And in the underground, we see actors that actually build teams of hackers to kind of be an affiliate team and then join or work with these various ransomware as a service operations. We've seen actors that are actually realize that there will be churn in a team, so they're training and recruiting new team members to replace ones that jump ship to other teams, for instance, or that basically go and do something else, or to simply increase the size of their teams or run multiple teams at the same time. And by the same token, we also see that affiliate teams have started getting into the habit of working with multiple ransomware as a service operations at the same time. The idea being that it is very good to have options. And as we'll see some of the dramas unfold, that's probably a good decision. One other interesting thing around the affiliates is their TTPs. When you look at their activities, and actually when you look at what they're trying to do, which is to gain an initial foothold, then move laterally, find the most valuable assets and exfiltrate them, that sounds very much like what nation states or espionage teams would also be trying to do. And their TTPs actually very closely align. They also very closely align to, for instance, things like red teaming. So the only thing that's really different is the final step where they deploy the ransomware. Of course, now you can have, for instance, nation states which deploy destructive ransomware to cover their tracks and also make attribution more difficult. So they're all starting to look more and more alike. And when we look at the tools that they use, things like Cobalt Strike, Metasploit, Mimikatz, PowerShell, the Soft Perfect Network Scanner, if you're a pen tester, these will be very familiar because these are the exact same tools that pen testers and red teams use. And as a matter of fact, because of the kind of appearance of ransomware attacks and the focus on the affiliates, pen testing skills are some of the most in-demand skills in the underground right now. Even more interestingly, by the way, it said they are very much alike, affiliates and nation states. This means if you protect against one, you also help to protect against the other. So if you pay close attention to what your red team or your pen testers are doing and make it harder for them to get in, you're also protecting against these threats. The other interesting observation is that there is actually overlap between the two. We see affiliates that actually also are in the employ of nation states. They're engaged in both types of activities. So they're in both camps at the same time. Our third category of actors are the ransomware as a service operators. Now, as I said, The ransomware itself is very specialized. In order to be able to run an attack, you need ransomware software to begin with. It needs to be good quality. And because that is such a specialized activity, this was mostly been turned into kind of ransomware as a service, where operators said, we will write this as a service, and you can then contract with us and we will deliver the ransomware. Now, that is how it started out. But of course, then you get into the kind of the biggest and the second stage of the ransomware attack, which is convincing the victim to actually pay up. And it turns out there that having a recognized name as a ransomware operation helps with this. You're almost like a brand. When the victim deals with a brand that they know about, that they've heard about before, and where they've seen examples of people paying up and getting their access to their data back, all of that increases the likelihood of a victim paying up. Now, once they also started to use the threat of publicizing or leaking stolen data as a way to threaten victims into paying up, being well known in the public eye actually became even more important, because as the saying goes, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around, does it actually make a sound? By the same token, if you have a leak site that almost no one knows about, no one looks at, if you leak data there, is it going to have a big impact? Versus if you put it on a leak site that a lot of the press is monitoring, because they know that this is where the first news that an organization has been hit with ransomware will often be found. So obviously it's the latter. So with that, ransomware as a service actually turned into more of had a brand aspect to it as well. The more well-known you are, the better and better it is to work with from an affiliate standpoint. So operators actually actively build the brand by seeking publicity. When we see them giving interviews to the press or giving interviews in blogs or security research or whatever, this isn't vanity. This is part of their a tactic for them to build out their brand and increase their profits. So, and the actor Unknown, spokesperson for the REvil ransomware as a service, actually said as much in one of the interviews, where he showed that this was a tactic. Due to our work with the press, we've become trustworthy and fear-inducing. He says large companies are eagerly entering into negotiations because they clearly see what happens to their peers and competitors. That's that visibility. And it's attractive to the affiliates. We take on professionals who are tired of working with little-known software. So building out that brand is very important. And as in all things in life, what goes up can also go down. That same thing can happen to your brand or to the image that you've built for yourself. So what do you do if your brand takes a hit? Well, what we mostly see the actors do is that they simply abandon it. They regroup under a new name, under a new brand, and try to put as much distance between themselves and the old brand as they can. So that explains what you sometimes see with ransomware as a service offerings disappearing, all the actors all their handles disappearing, and then a new group popping up, which look suspiciously similar but claim that they have nothing to do with that old brand. One example of this was NetWalker. They were a ransomware as a service operation. Their leak site was seized, as you can see from this screenshot. So this hidden site had been seized, and also one of their top affiliates got arrested. Now that's not a good look. Remember, especially as they're trying to make it attractive for affiliates to work for them. Basically, the image associated with NetWalker now is come work with us and get arrested. And that is not a good look. So they basically abandoned everything to reappear under a completely different name sometime later. Now, these are the three main roles, but as the number of attacks increased and as these larger ransoms came into play, you also see the appearance of more specialized roles. The underground is doing what it is made for, what it is good at, which is kind of dividing up and finding even more specialized niches that you can be active in. So two new runs that we've seen appear are the one of a negotiator. We've seen negotiators on the victim side, where companies will help you in negotiating a ransom and try and negotiate the ransom down. Well, the attackers are employing negotiators as well. The idea behind this is they want to avoid getting knocked down too far. They want to avoid the victim kind of spinning them a yarn and then kind of reducing it that way down lower and basically leaving money on the table. Another is that we saw an affiliate hiring business analysts. The idea behind this is they want to be more effective, they want to be smarter and more selective in who they go after. For instance, if you have an access broker who gives you 5 possible targets to go after, which of the 5 do you select? Which one do you go for? Which one will net you the biggest ransom? And what is the ransom? What is kind of the Goldilocks ransom to set in an attack? Not too high, not too low, just right. And once you know that you have a Goldilocks ransom set, if the other side tries to negotiate you down, you can recognize those for the tactics that they are. So these things are all kind of interconnected. Now, this is by and large how well-run ransomware attacks work. But things don't always go according to plan. And in this section, we'll look at some recent ransomware dramas and the lessons the actors drew from them, besides their value to defenders for drawing back the curtains on some of the actors and the activities that are going on here. So one of the more kind of well-publicized, probably well-known ransomware dramas was the Colonial Pipeline incident. Actually, the publicity was the drama to some extent. Normally, actors try and maximize the impact of an attack to increase the likelihood of a ransom being paid. But in this case, they got just a little more than they bargained for. As you may know, what happened is they ransomed the Colonial Pipeline Company in the US, and as a result, they shut down their pipeline operations. Basically, they could no longer supply fuel. So in a number of states, basically, the petrol or gas ran out. There were queues at the pumps, and a national emergency was declared. The state of emergency was declared, and actually President Biden held a press conference about this whole attack. So this was actually a case where a financially motivated group ending up causing an impact that is normally associated with what you call a nation-state cyber attack. Queues at the pumps, no more petrol, energy supplies affected, state of emergency, president giving a press conference. So it ended up being kind of a watershed moment for the cyber underground, because basically they realized that they can have an impact way bigger than they ever intended. And some of the forums decided that this would be a good moment to distance themselves from this type of activity going forward. And some of the other ransomware as a services operations kind of realizing that they better implement some rules to try and prevent being the next one to unwittingly cause a state of emergency in a foreign country. Now, not that they care too much about that, but what they do fear is all of the law enforcement and security services attention this entails. It basically paints a huge target on your back. So in response, a lot of forums banned the discussion of ransomware. This led to the actor Orange starting up the RAMP forum, specifically dedicated to ransomware. And REvil and Avedon basically announced that they would move to a model where affiliates would have to ask permission from the operators before engaging any specific targets, just to make sure that they weren't about to unleash the next Colonial Pipeline. So, although the Colonial Pipeline incident got a lot of attention, around the same time, another ransomware as a service kind of suffered an untimely demise, Babook. Although it was much less publicized, it too contained lots of interesting drama and insights into the inner workings of the group. So here's a short timeline of what happened. Babook first appeared in late 2020 with an affiliate program launched in January 2021, run by an actor by the same name, Babook. Now, in April of 2021, they attacked and executed a ransomware attack against the US police force. And as the force didn't pay up, they leaked and released data that they had exfiltrated. And that contained quite a lot of very sensitive information, including the details of informants being run by that police force. Now, that is the type of information, if it becomes public, that can have very grave consequences. Then in May of 2021, and there was a lot of publicity and discussion around this, in May of 2021, there were two announcements in quick succession. The first one is, we're going open source. Quickly followed by another announcement, no, we're not going open source, sorry. Babook will be transferred to another team instead, and we're going to focus on publishing leaked data. Shortly after that, the Babook leak website was rebranded as payload.bin, kind of announcing that they will focus on data theft. And then in June 2021, a new leak site for Babuk 2.0 appears, which seems to suggest that Babuk, the ransomware Babuk, had indeed been transferred to another team. But then in June of 2021, an actor by the name of Biba99 uploads a builder to a forum. So anyone can now build a Babuk binary. You can't edit the source code, but you can create a configuration and create a Babuk binary that you can use to encrypt a network. In July of 2021, that same payload.bin forum becomes a RAMP, the RAMP forum run by the actor Orange, also known as Boris Yeltsin. So Orange, and that was the announcement as part of the Colonial Pipeline incident when the other forums banned ransomware discussions. Obviously, the actors behind the payload.bin decided this is an opportunity for us. We will just become the dedicated home to everything ransomware. Orange also suddenly uploads a Babuk builder. And then in September of 2021, to finish it all off, the actor Diatka0220, a brilliant name, leaks the actual source code and claims to have a terminal illness. So this is the timeline. Lots of things happening. They seem to be, some of them seem to be related, but there's no real, what was actually going on for all of these events to appear? Well, what was really going on was that the Babuk ransomware as a service operation was two actors, the actor Orange, who was the leader, and Diatka0220, who was the developer. The thing that forced the kind of caused the demise was that data leak from the US police, from that police force. Basically, it caused them to lose a lot of affiliates. A lot of their affiliates thought, you are painting such a massive target on your back. We need to put some distance between us and you. We don't want anything. We don't want to be anywhere near you when they eventually kick down your door. So that was a problem. They started to lose affiliates, and with that, you start to lose income. Turns out they have another problem. One of the things that they love, that ransomware groups love to encrypt, is VMware servers, because of course you encrypt one machine, but that can actually be running hundreds of servers or dozens, depending on the size of the machine. And so with one encryption run, you can basically take out a whole network. Now, the encryption code for Babuk for ASXE servers was based on the DarkSide source code, but it had a couple of bugs. And one of the big ones is that the victims couldn't actually decrypt any images that Babuk had encrypted. And there was an instance, multiple instances, where victims paid the ransom and then discovered that they couldn't actually recover large parts of their network because they couldn't decrypt VMware images. Orange discovered this and was a huge, kind of huge fight with Diatka0220, because of course this put the nail in the coffin of the whole model of making money with Babuk. And they parted ways. But it's likely that Orange made the actor publish the source code, or made the developer publish the source code, to prevent him from profiting from it any further. By basically releasing it out into the open, there's no way he could charge anyone else for that in the future. Orange, Babuk, Boris Yeltsin, and Biba99 are likely all the same actor. He was the one leaking the builders. And then Orange went on with initially payload.bin, but in response to the Colonial Pipeline fallout, decided this was an opportunity, and he created RAMP in response to kind of become a new home for all the actors and handles and people that had been kicked off the forums when the forums announced that they would no longer tolerate discussions around ransomware. So here are a couple of screenshots of those discussions and announcements. Here is the first announcement, Hello World 2, where basically the group announces that we are closing, Babuk is closed, and we're going open source. Quickly followed by Hello World 3. No, we're not. Nope. It's going to be transferred to a team, and this site is actually going to focus on publishing leaked data. The last sentence, I mean, the English is a bit crooked, but I think what I'm trying to say is, if you don't have your own blog for publishing leaked data, we can publish your data for you. We've seen this before. Again, dividing up the labor. If your ransomware is a brand, if you have a leak site that is very well known, then maybe you can offer that as a service to other actors. And then finally, once you've done this, you need an entire new rebrand. So basically on the same domain, they suddenly started hosting payload.bin, a leaks site. So that's Babuk. And finally, we have the screenshot, by the way, of Diadga 0220. We've blanked out some of the flowery language. But basically, he's saying, here is the source code, and he's kind of alluding that he has some kind of terminal illness. For actors wanting to disappear, that is not entirely unheard of that we see them do that. All kinds of excuses that all mean, don't come looking for me, I won't be here anymore. So the last and the third set of ransomware dramas, but it's a big one, this one, are the dramas around REvil. REvil first appeared in April, I think, of 2019. It became a kind of public ransomware as a service offering, meaning you could apply to join in May of 2019. And from that time, it grew into one of the most well-known ransomware as a service operations until its demise in late 2021. For most of that time, its spokesperson was the actor Unknown. We've seen him, and I've mentioned him a couple of times before, who maintained a presence on various underground forums and was engaged in a number of activities, such as recruiting affiliates and giving interviews, which is kind of building up the brand and making sure you have the affiliates actually execute the attacks. But as you're building your brand, you have to manage it. There were some bumps along the way. The actor launched a complaint against another actor, a top-tier actor, AD0, when an escrow deal that he was running failed. There was a complaint against Unknown himself and the REvil operators by an actor called Viva la Muerte, alleging that they basically stole the whole idea from someone else. There was a complaint from an actor, P1J, or PIJA. Interestingly, this was the type of complaint where it turns out that the complainant, PIJA, in this one, had basically was complaining about the wrong thing to the wrong people. But more kind of on a more serious and relevant complaint was a complaint from another complaint that Unknown launched against the actor's signature, basically each alleging that the other had ripped them off. And then after the Colonial Pipeline, but also the JBS and Kaseya incidents, and those latter two were actually REvil, attacks run by REvil, the REvil ransomware as a service operation went private again. So it was no longer a public operation. You couldn't apply to join anymore. And then Unknown suddenly disappears. And so suddenly that not even his fellow operators knew what had happened. So in response, they shut down their servers. They reappear a bit later on. But by that time, the underground had discovered that there was what they thought was a backdoor in the old version of REvil, which meant that trust in the whole setup was somewhat eroded. And then the final nail in the coffin was the FSB arresting several Russian members or alleged Russian members of REvil at the behest of the FBI. So let's go into all of these dramas in a little more detail in the next slides. First, here are some, and these are screen captures from our platform. So these are posts by Unknown where he's recruiting affiliates. Please note that these have all been, you'll see some where basically he says we don't work with English speakers, and the post is in English, which is a bit odd, but that's because they've been translated from Russian by our translation team. So the first one, this is kind of the first announcement, the very first announcement by Unknown. There's a new ransomware affiliate program. What do you need to know? So what are we looking for in affiliates? And basically contact me via a personal message, and you can apply to join and be one of the affiliates. Then there's a whole thread around this. Basically, this was the recruitment thread. So whenever new slots are available, actor Unknown will post and say, hey, we've got new slots available. And of course, when you do that, you kind of advertise your results so far. So basically already saying, look, we've done profitable campaigns. So this is this would be good for you to join this affiliate program. And as they become more well-known, kind of the posts get a little terse. There's one slot available. Those in the know will get it. So another post when a slot opens up. And here's a post where they're basically telling their followers that, A, we don't work with English-speaking users, and none of our affiliates can either. Make sure that you know that you can kind of trust the other people that you're working with. Be on the lookout for security researchers, FBI agents, etc. And they offer some tips on how to weed them out. It has to do with their proficiency in Russian, but also note the questions about the shared history of Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, or Russia. And then in English, this post is actually in English. Someone in English says, I've PM'd you a list of what we have access to, and the response is very curt. Your English speakers, we don't work with English speaking users. Then, as we've seen from the Conti leaks as well, but REvil is no different. It's a large operation. They actually have holidays. So on the 1st of January, they take a day off. But on other holidays, they will be around to do business. And here's one in response to the demise of another. I don't actually know which one it is. The demise of another ransomware as a service operation, and this is actually where they are courting some of the affiliates who now no longer have a home, and they're just basically saying, "Come join us." So this is when another ransomware as a service operation goes down. That's an opportunity for others to basically kind of grab the best affiliate teams for themselves. So this is in December of 2020. Then we have their post in which they announce post the Colonial Pipeline incident, where they're saying we've got new restrictions in place. So basically, you can't target the social sector, you can't target government, and you have to get prior approval. And that is in response to what just happened to DarkSide, who basically had most of their infrastructure taken down and seized in response to the Colonial Pipeline incident. He also says we've added, it says 3 domains, probably means 3 slots. So for former DarkSide affiliates, they will, or someone who's looking for a home, if you're, again, they have 3 slots available. Hurry up is the admonition. And a day later, it says the public recruiting campaign is over. We're going private. And if you do want to get in touch with them again, you'd have to go through one of their existing affiliates. So that's kind of recruiting affiliates. The other thing that Unknown did was give interviews, quite a lot of them actually, or at least 2 very prominent ones, to a security vlogger, a Russian security vlogger, 2 occasions when he gave quite lengthy interviews, all of that to kind of drum up, kind of build up the brand. Now, the reasons for the interviews twofold. The first one was in response to a post by Unknown to a forum in which he announced that the group will be placing $1 million into escrow, and that's a sizable amount of money to put into escrow on a forum, and so that got a lot of attention. After the interview was given, that post was quickly amended. The escrow amount was reduced to $30,000, I think $3,000 actually. And Unknown said that he was only speaking for themselves and not the group as a whole. But we did learn a couple of interesting things in that interview, and they kind of line up with what our own research indicated. The core group was only 8 to 10 people, so there's only 8 to 10 operators of REvil, a turnover of $100 million US dollars per year. And interestingly, they said, even back then, they said that for our affiliates, what we tell them to focus on is the theft of data. He says most of the victims end up paying up because they don't want their data leaked rather than the encryption. That doesn't seem to worry them as much. They can recover from that. So they said focus on the data theft. That is a bigger driver forcing victims to pay up. And that trend started then, and that we see that is increasing now, where you actually also see groups that focus solely on data theft. And staggeringly, he said 1 in 3 victims actually end up paying up. The second interview, same blogger, was the JBL incident. There was a lot of fallout from that ransom attack. So basically what happened is they ran a ransomware attack against JBL, a Brazilian company, is in the meat processing business, but also has plants in the US. And in response to that attack, US law enforcement came up with statements to try and put pressure on REvil, saying, they would focus or go after REvil because they'd been targeting US infrastructure or critical infrastructure. That had worked with DarkSide. Definitely that threat had definitely kind of scared off the DarkSide operators. So I thought maybe this is the way to go after these ransomware operators. Basically tell them we're coming after you. Well, if that was the idea, it seems to have had the opposite effect here. Unknown actually reacted with, I don't know, where the victim was Brazilian. We actually actively try and avoid US targets because we don't want US law enforcement to focus on us. But if they're still going to come after us, then why bother? And so he announced that, well, from now on, every single US target would be allowed again, and we will attack everything. Now, that is very cocky. This is almost like goading US law enforcement, challenging them. And that is akin to painting a very big target on your back. But that was that interview. And to be done, Unknown had his fair share kind of run-ins with others as well. There was very interestingly, in April of 2020, a dispute with AD0. So AD0 or ADO was a moderator on a forum, but also ran an escrow service on that same forum. The idea being, if you're doing a deal with someone, you pay the money into escrow, and only once the other party has delivered the goods and everybody has agreed that the goods have been delivered are the funds released. So the ability to release funds is quite fundamental to an escrow service. And the claim was that actually when it came time to releasing the funds, AD0 couldn't because some of his wallets had been seized, crypto wallets had been seized. So the idea was the funds that had been paid to him, he couldn't get to and he couldn't release. And so probably those deals fell through. So Unknown launched a dispute. And what normally then happens is the moderators on the forum kind of examine the case and they will come to a judgment. And in this particular case, they found in favor of Unknown and banned AD0 from the forums until such time as he had made good on the, basically he had returned the money and also kind of paid any kind of the damages that his inability to fulfill his obligations had caused. So that happened in 2020 and April 2020, and almost immediately afterwards, a new actor pops up on that same forum, an actor by the name of Viva la Muerte, who suddenly launches a dispute against Unknown and claims that he knows Unknown from the past and that he, Unknown, and the other operators of REvil defrauded Viva la Muerte of $190,000, and that he basically wanted his money back. There's a whole exchange, threats are exchanged. So at some point, he's saying, how's Minsk, settling in well? So basically implying that he knows where Unknown lives. Your family will be the first to suffer. And he alludes that he can share the information on where Unknown lives with another person, the one who forced you to run away in 2017. The response for Unknown is quite terse. We will not pay. That is the... the thread goes on, and at some point it peters out, and nothing more is heard of it. But there was lots and lots of interesting information hidden in these exchanges. Next is an interaction with an actor by the name of Pija. This is actually a report that we wrote on it, and when this first came up. So Pija launches a complaint against another actor called Mr. Kremlin. And says that he was kicked out of REvil and that Mr. Kremlin is associated with REvil. Unknown steps in and basically tells him, apparently in a direct message, provides him with some information. And after that, Pija withdraws his complaint against Mr. Kremlin, and it kind of looks very much as if Pija had a complaint, but launched it against the wrong person, and probably wasn't actually an affiliate himself. But we think he was working for an affiliate team that kicked him out, and he then identified the wrong user, Mr. Kremlin, and started launching complaints against the REvil operators, where of course his real beef was actually with whoever ran the affiliate team that he was a member of. So I think that Unknown kind of stepped in to explain to him what's what, and that Mr. Kremlin had nothing to do with it. and so he dropped his complaint. So when we talk about these dramas and these complaints and you managing your brand, this is part of that management as well, where you basically have to step in when people get the complete wrong end of the stick. The final complaint was not a case of a mistaken identity or the wrong end of the stick. This is two sets of complaints. First, unknown launches a complaint against an actor called Signature, who he says is a negotiator who was negotiating in a ransomware case that they were running, a ransomware operation that they were running against an undisclosed company. And basically, he stopped pressuring the victim into paying up. And so the victim kind of lost interest, didn't pay the ransom. And that caused a loss of $7 million US. Not to be outdone, Signature immediately counterfiles and says, we were doing another, also involved in a case, but actually I was negotiating a ransom. And it turns out that, that behind my back, Unknown actually made an agreement directly with the victim for a lower ransom demand. And so he paid that lower ransom and I never got my cut. So it's claim and counterclaim. But interestingly, we talked about the appearance of negotiators. Well, this seems to be proof that there definitely are negotiator roles out there and happening. How these complaints panned out, in one case, the moderator said by this time discussion of ransomware had been forbidden on that particular forum. So they said, you're talking about a subject which is forbidden, so you can't actually lodge complaints around this. And in the other case, they decided that you're complaining about hypothetical profits that you did not make, and you can't complain about hypothetical profits. You can only complain about actual monies exchanging hand, not hypothetical ones. And then there was the drama around the appearance and reappearance of REvil. So what happens is in July of 2021, Unknown suddenly disappears. He completely disappears off the radar. He's gone, even to his fellow operators, who naturally don't quite know what's going on and fear that this may be some kind of law enforcement operation. Maybe Unknown has been captured. And so in response, they shut down all of their servers. Nothing happens. None of them get arrested. So in September, they basically switch everything back on. And another new actor handle, REvil, or One Day, is now their spokesperson. That actor is promptly banned from exploit because there's new rules on the exploit forum. You can't talk about ransomware anymore. And so he joins the RAMP forum. But things don't get any better because the actor Orange actually runs RAMP, but he claims that in the past, the REvil ransomware as a service operator scammed him, and so he won't tolerate REvil on RAMP, and he kicks them off again. By this time, there's an uproar on the forums when someone discovers that there's actually each REvil ransomware sample has not one but two keys. There's one key that is used to kind of decrypt that particular victim. That is the per victim key, and everybody knows each ransomware has a per victim key. That's how it works. The victim pays to get that key. But someone discovers that actually each REvil sample also can be decrypted with another key, the so-called master key. That key is the same for all samples. If you actually get your hands on that master key, you can decrypt every single REvil victim. But people didn't know that this second key existed. And so there's an uproar where they say, well, this must mean that the operators are scamming us. They can scam affiliates by basically decrypting victims without the affiliate knowing about it. This was exactly the complaint that Signature made. And so Signature wades into that and says, see, that it's what I've been saying all along. In response, the new spokesperson, One Day or REvil, says, the secret key is no longer present in new versions. He said it was only intended to be used in cases where they encrypt something that they shouldn't encrypt. Colonial Pipeline type incidents, when they end up by accident encrypting a victim in Russia, for instance. If the affiliate doesn't want to cooperate, then the operators could always use the master key to decrypt such victims. But he says the key is no longer present in new versions. And we have samples through our malware intelligence that confirm on analysis that the key is gone, which means that REvil or that actor appears to have access to the source code because he's able to make such changes. But the damage has been done, and also there's doubts in the underground whether or not this is actually REvil returning or whether this is just one giant law enforcement sting. So after a short while, the new spokesman says REvil is now going to operate completely privately, and it won't be an open program anymore. And we see victims being added until October 2021, and then everything goes very silent and dark for REvil. And that was that until July of this year, when a window opens, which has now probably been nailed shut and bricked up, because for the first time in memory, the FSB actually arrests Russian cyber criminals on Russian soil at the behest of the FBI, according to the statement the FSB put out. And this, of course, all the while tensions on the border with Ukraine are increasing. So that's very odd timing. They've never done this before. And just as the tension and threat of an invasion is looming, they suddenly arrest Russian cyber criminals at the behest of the FBI. Now, this is very odd timing, or it could possibly be someone showing goodwill through back channels. And if that happens, that would mean that top-tier actors in the underground now have become pawns almost in nation-state diplomatic maneuvers. Just arrest some of these actors as a goodwill token, and that means there's something else for them to worry about. And as I said, there's already plenty of them to worry about, and all of these dramas have had plenty of lessons to learn. So what are the lessons that the actors have learned from these dramas over the past 6 months or so? Well, the first lesson is be careful who you attack. If you attack the wrong target, the consequences can be big, sometimes too big. Babuk showed them, don't scare your affiliates. Don't do things which are too far out there, such as publishing the details of police informants, because that may actually cause your own affiliates to run away. Unknown showed it's best not to get too cocky. That usually doesn't end well. As an affiliate, one of the lessons they've learned, make sure you have options. Work with multiple ransomware as a service operations. That means you always have a choice. And also you'll have something to fall back on should your kind of ransomware as a service of choice suddenly disappear, because they do have a habit of suddenly disappearing. Also, in the model where the operators are running the negotiations, when they disappear, quite often you'll end up losing money. It's this kind of conclusion or this insight that has led some ransomware as a services to kind of look at new models. Lockbit, for instance, are saying we don't want to be this hierarchical model where we run the negotiations. Lockbit is a new ransomware as a service, or one of the more recent ones. They actually say, no, we see ourselves as a kind of a service provider. So you're in charge of the negotiations and just give us the share when the victim pays up. That sidesteps that problem. Finally, top affiliates hold a lot of power. They're like key players or top players in football. So why be working for the operators? It's a much more a relation of equals. And the final one is, over the past year, 6 months or so, law enforcement focus has gotten a lot more intense. Post-Colonial Pipeline, for instance, and now it seems Russian security agencies are also looking for you. On that topic, this post popped up in the underground. This is actually someone asking for advice on what to do, as they had been approached by one of the Russian services. And say one of the Russian services, because the resulting discussion on this question, what do I do, was interesting and very lively, with actors, first of all, giving tips on figuring out and what it means for which service this actually was. Was it local? Was it national? Some of them saying it can't be it can't be the kind of the national FSB, because you wouldn't be asking this if they were. They would come down on you much harder. What was their aim? Why were they asking him to join? And what he should actually do. So from this post and from that discussion, it seems that lots and lots of different services in Russia are actually trying to recruit underground actors. So it's not getting any easier for them, because as you can see in some instances, they don't seem to be very eager to be recruited. And we've seen that multiple times where some actors say, that's the last thing I want to do. So another another thing to add to their worries. And that brings us to the end of this session. I know I've gone over just a little bit, but to summarize, I hope that at the end of this you can now see that there's a whole ecosystem in the underground that supports and facilitates ransomware attacks. We've got three main roles: access brokers, affiliates, and operators, but also other roles around them. Some of the actors in the groups are mature and very well organized, but there is also a lot of drama. There's backstabbing, double crossing, self-promotion, there's scams and other kind of general fallings out between actors. This is actually a very good source of intelligence and insights on the workings of the ransomware ecosystem and on how all these various moving bits kind of come together and fit together. But it's also fascinating in its own right, and it's yet again proof of the old saying that thieves do indeed steal from thieves. And with that, I wanted to say thank you for listening to our talk on ransomware and why you should focus on more than just the ransomware itself.